I never thought at 67 years old I would be fighting my own son for the right to live in my home. My name is Henry, and after my heart attack last spring, I discovered some disturbing papers while recovering. After raising Jason alone for 20 years following my wife Linda's death, I believed we had an unbreakable bond. When I collapsed in my workshop, I had no idea that instead of worrying if I would live or die, my son was already planning to claim my house and everything I had worked for. If you've ever trusted someone who betrayed you, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe as I reveal how my spring cleaning turned the tables on my greedy son. I spent 40 years as a civil engineer, designing and overseeing bridge construction across America. It was honest work that paid well enough for me to provide a good life for my family. Back in 1985, Linda and I purchased our Portland home, a modest 3-bedroom craftsman with a detached garage that I later converted into my workshop. We were so proud of that house, our first and only real estate purchase. We had saved for years while renting a small apartment, cutting corners and putting away every extra penny until we could afford the down payment. Linda made that house a home. She painted every room herself, planted the garden that still blooms every spring, and created a warm space where our son Jason could grow up feeling secure and loved. She was an elementary school teacher, beloved by her students and dedicated to education. We shared the same values about raising our son, wanting him to be kind, honest, and hardworking. When Jason was 12, Linda was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The next 18 months were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and watching my vibrant wife fade away. I still remember the night she made me promise to make sure Jason would get the best education possible. She believed that would give him the foundation for a good life. I promised her I would, never imagining how that promise would eventually be twisted against me. After Linda died, raising Jason alone became my entire focus. I turned down promotions that would have required travel, adjusted my hours to be home when he returned from school, and learned to cook decent meals through a lot of trial and error. Jason and I grieved together, finding our new normal without Linda. There were tough times, especially during his teenage years, but we got through them. I sacrificed to keep Jason in the private school he had attended since kindergarten, knowing the stability was important after losing his mother. Later, I paid for his college education at a prestigious university where he studied finance. I was so proud when he graduated and quickly landed a job at a financial services firm in Portland. He seemed to be on the right track, and I felt I had kept my promise to Linda. The early years of his career, Jason would visit regularly, calling several times a week. He would bring dinner over on Sundays, and we would watch football together. I noticed gradual changes as he moved up in his company, becoming more focused on material things, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and status symbols. I tried not to judge, figuring it was just a phase young people go through when they first taste success. I retired 5 years ago, at 62, with a modest pension and Social Security, plus some savings. My house was fully paid off, which gave me financial security. My needs were simple. I enjoyed puttering around in my workshop, creating furniture and wooden toys that I mostly gave away to neighbors with young children. My neighbor Walter became a good friend during my retirement. He was a retired high school shop teacher who appreciated my woodworking projects. We often shared tools and advice, and he was always willing to lend a hand when I tackled bigger projects. Walter and his wife Carol had me over for dinner at least once a month, and they checked on me regularly, knowing I lived alone. I spent most days in my workshop, which became my sanctuary after retirement. The smell of fresh-cut wood, the precision of measurements, and the satisfaction of creating something with my hands brought me joy that office work never had. I made rocking chairs, bookcases, toy chests, and intricate wooden puzzles. The workshop represented freedom to me, the ability to spend my time doing what I loved rather than what I had to do to earn a living. During a routine checkup 3 years ago, my doctor warned me about my high blood pressure and cholesterol. I nodded and took the prescriptions, but I downplayed the seriousness to myself and to Jason. I figured I was in decent shape for my age, still active and independent. I could climb stairs without getting winded, could carry my groceries, and spend hours standing in my workshop without issue. I thought that was good enough, and I disliked taking medications that made me feel slightly off balance. Sometimes I skipped doses, figuring my body would be fine without them. That decision would come back to haunt me in ways I never could have imagined. It was a Saturday morning in April when it happened. I had been in my workshop since 7 a.m., working on a jewelry box for Carol's birthday. The spring sunshine streamed through the windows, dust particles dancing in the light as I sanded the delicate edges of the box. I remember reaching for my water bottle and feeling a sudden pressure in my chest, like someone had placed a heavy weight on me. At first, I told myself it was just indigestion from the bacon I had eaten for breakfast. I sat down on my stool thinking it would pass. But then the pressure increased, spreading to my left arm and jaw. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and I felt nauseated and dizzy. I tried to stand, thinking I should go inside and lie down, but my legs buckled beneath me. As I collapsed to the concrete floor, my last coherent thought was that I should have taken those blood pressure pills more seriously. I don't know how long I lay there before Walter found me. Later, he told me he had come over to borrow my circular saw and knocked on the workshop door. When I didn't answer, he peered through the window and saw me on the floor. He immediately called 911 and then used the spare key I had given him to get inside. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours to me. I was drifting in and out of consciousness, aware of urgent voices and hands moving me onto a stretcher. The paramedics worked quickly, attaching monitors, inserting an IV, placing an oxygen mask over my face. One kept talking to me, asking my name, telling me to hang on, saying I was having a heart attack but they were taking care of me. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and jostling movement. I remember staring at the ambulance ceiling, thinking about Linda and wondering if I would see her soon. Then I thought of Jason and managed to ask the paramedic to call him. She assured me they would contact my family as soon as we reached the hospital. In the emergency room, doctors and nurses swarmed around me. They cut off my shirt, attached more monitors, took blood samples, and moved me through different machines. I heard terms like ST elevation and cardiac catheterization. Someone mentioned blockages and stents. I tried to follow what was happening, but the pain and fear made it difficult to concentrate. Before they took me to the catheterization lab, I asked again about Jason. A nurse promised to call him right away. As they wheeled me into the procedure, I drifted into unconsciousness with my son's name on my lips. I woke up 24 hours later in the cardiac care unit. The room was dimly lit, monitors beeping steadily beside me. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure where I was or what had happened. Then the memories flooded back, along with the dull ache in my chest. I turned my head, expecting to see Jason, but instead found Walter dozing in a chair beside my bed. Walter startled awake when I croaked his name, his face lighting up with relief. He squeezed my hand and told me I had given them all quite a scare. When I asked about Jason, Walter's expression changed subtly. He explained that Jason had been notified immediately after my admission, but had said he was tied up with work and would come as soon as possible. I called Jason using Walter's phone, my voice weak but insistent. Jason sounded distracted, saying he was in the middle of an important deal but was on his way now. He asked if I was stable, and when I confirmed I was, he seemed relieved in a way that struck me as odd. Not like a son grateful his father would survive, but like someone checking a box on a to-do list. Jason finally arrived 2 days after my heart attack, by which time I had been moved to a regular room. He looked immaculate in an expensive suit, carrying a small plant from the gift shop. He hugged me briefly, then spent most of his visit on his phone or talking with doctors in the hallway outside my room. I could see him through the doorway, nodding seriously as they spoke, but he shared very little of these conversations with me. Nurse Amanda, a kind woman in her 50s who had been caring for me since the CCU, noticed Jason's behavior. Once, after he stepped out to take a call, she asked gently if everything was okay between us. I defended him, explaining that he had an important position and many responsibilities. She nodded but didn't seem convinced. When Jason did sit with me, his questions focused on practical matters rather than my health. He wanted to know about my insurance coverage, whether I had updated my will recently, if my house was secure with me being away. Not once did he ask how I felt, if I was in pain, or what my prognosis might be. It was as if he was conducting a business meeting rather than visiting his critically ill father. On the 3rd day of my hospitalization, a social worker came to discuss discharge plans. She explained I would need several weeks of recovery and shouldn't be alone immediately after returning home. Before I could respond, Jason jumped in, suggesting an assisted living facility might be the best option, at least temporarily. He mentioned he had already researched several facilities in the area. I was stunned by this suggestion. I had expected to recover in my own home, perhaps with some help for the first few weeks. The thought of being placed in a facility, even temporarily, filled me with dread. I tried to object, but Jason smoothly talked over me, discussing options with the social worker as if I weren't in the room. Amanda, who had entered during this conversation to check my vitals, caught my eye. She seemed to understand my distress and subtly shook her head, letting me know I had options. After Jason and the social worker left, she sat beside me and explained that with proper home health care, many cardiac patients recovered successfully in their own homes. She promised to help me explore those options, regardless of what my son thought was best. That night, alone in my hospital room, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of Jason's behavior. Something had changed in my son, something I hadn't noticed or had chosen to ignore. As my physical strength slowly returned, I realized I would need all my wits about me to navigate whatever was coming next. 8 days after my heart attack, I was finally discharged from the hospital. Despite Jason's continued suggestions about assisted living, Amanda had helped me arrange for home health care. A nurse would visit daily for the first week, and physical therapy would come 3 times a week. It wasn't cheap, but my insurance covered most of it, and I was determined to recover in my own home. Jason reluctantly drove me home, complaining about having to take time off work. As we pulled into the driveway, the sight of my house brought tears to my eyes. The spring flowers Linda had planted years ago were blooming in a riot of colors, and Walter had mowed the lawn while I was hospitalized. Despite my weakened state, just seeing my home filled me with renewed determination to get better. Inside, I was surprised to find the house unusually tidy. Jason mentioned he had done some cleaning up, which seemed uncharacteristic but thoughtful. He helped me settle into my recliner and brought my medications, then announced he needed to get some work done. He set up his laptop at my dining table, explaining he would stay with me for a few days to help out. That first afternoon, I dozed in my chair while Jason moved around the house. In my half-sleep, I was vaguely aware of drawers opening and closing, papers shuffling. When I fully woke, Jason was sitting across from me, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He volunteered to help organize my paperwork, claiming the hospital bills and insurance forms would be complicated. His offer seemed reasonable, so I directed him to my home office where I kept important documents. He spent hours in there while I rested, emerging occasionally to ask me questions about various accounts and policies. The next morning, my home health nurse, Sophia, arrived for her first visit. She was a petite Filipina woman with a no-nonsense attitude and gentle hands. While she checked my vitals and reviewed my medications, Jason hovered nearby, asking detailed questions about my condition and care needs. When Sophia mentioned I was progressing well and might not need extended care, Jason frowned slightly before smoothing his expression. After Sophia left, Walter came by with a casserole from Carol and to see how I was doing. While Jason was in the kitchen putting away the food, Walter leaned close and mentioned something odd. He had seen strangers examining the exterior of my house twice while I was in the hospital. They had taken photos and made notes, but when he approached them, they claimed to be from the utility company checking gas lines. Walter, a retired teacher with a healthy skepticism, hadn't believed them but couldn't prove otherwise. That evening, while Jason went out to pick up dinner, I decided to check my office. Something about Jason's helpfulness didn't sit right with me. The room looked organized, but as I opened my desk drawers, I realized they had been completely rearranged. Files were in different places, and some papers seemed to be missing altogether. My property deeds, insurance policies, and financial statements that I always kept in a specific folder were gone from their usual spot. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I noticed Jason's expensive briefcase sitting beside the desk. I hesitated, knowing I shouldn't snoop, but my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I carefully opened it and found several real estate brochures tucked into a side pocket. They were for luxury condos in the downtown area, all marked up with Jason's handwriting. In another pocket was a business card for a real estate agent specializing in quick home sales. I was replacing everything exactly as I had found it when I heard Jason's car in the driveway. I hurried back to my recliner, my heart racing in a way that couldn't be good for my recovery. Over dinner, I watched my son carefully, noting how he avoided meeting my eyes and kept checking his phone. Later that night, I woke to the sound of Jason's voice. He was in the kitchen, speaking quietly on his phone, but in the silence of the house, his words carried to my bedroom. I caught phrases like "quick sale," and after he's placed, that sent chills through me. He mentioned something about the market being hot and not wanting to miss the window of opportunity. The next day, while Jason ran errands, Sophia helped me to my office where I conducted a more thorough search. In the recycling bin, partially hidden under junk mail, I found printouts of emails between Jason and real estate agents discussing the potential value of my home and the best timing for selling. There were also emails about luxury condos he had viewed, with notes about using a bridge loan until he could access certain funds. When Jason returned, I confronted him directly, asking why he was looking into selling my house. He seemed startled that I knew but quickly recovered, claiming it was for my own good. He launched into a prepared speech about how the house was too much for me to manage alone, how I could fall again with no one to help me, how the stairs were a hazard, and how the money from the sale could provide for better care. I reminded him firmly that I had experienced a heart attack, not dementia, and was perfectly capable of making my own decisions about where I lived. Jason's expression hardened for a moment before he forced a smile and said we could discuss it later when I was feeling stronger. His condescending tone made me feel like a child being patted on the head. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Jason would make phone calls in hushed tones when he thought I was napping. He continued to suggest assisted living facilities, bringing home brochures, and leaving them where I would see them. He mentioned repeatedly how much work the house required, and how it might be better to move somewhere maintenance-free. Sophia became an unexpected ally. She noticed Jason's behavior and began timing her visits when he was out. She confided that she had seen similar situations with other patients, where family members used medical crises to gain control of assets. Her warnings confirmed my growing suspicions. One afternoon, Jason brought up the subject of my workshop. He suggested selling my tools, since I wouldn't be able to do woodworking for some time, possibly ever again, according to him. The thought of losing my workshop, my sanctuary, was the final confirmation I needed. My son wasn't concerned about my well-being. He was systematically trying to dismantle my life and take control of my assets. That night, alone in my room, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since the heart attack, not from physical pain, but from the deep emotional wound of betrayal. The son I had raised, the child Linda and I had loved and sacrificed for, was calculating the value of my possessions while I was still using them. I felt a grief almost as profound as when I had lost Linda. As I wiped my tears, my eyes fell on the bookshelf where I kept Linda's journals. I hadn't read them in years, finding them too painful after her death. But now, I felt drawn to them, needing some connection to the love and integrity she had embodied. I pulled one down and opened it to a random page. In her beautiful handwriting, I found words that would give me strength for the battle ahead. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. Do not let fear of conflict prevent you from protecting what matters. Linda had written those words during her cancer treatment, encouraging herself to advocate for her care when needed. Now they spoke to me across the years, reminding me that I still had fight left in me. I might have had a heart attack, but I wasn't ready to surrender my life or my home to anyone, not even my own son. 3 weeks after my heart attack, Jason's mask of caring son slipped even further. He arrived one morning with 2 men in suits whom he introduced as his attorney and an elder care specialist. They spread papers across my dining table, talking rapidly about transfer documents, power of attorney, and healthcare proxies. Jason explained that these were just precautionary measures given my recent health scare. I recognized a legal ambush when I saw one. Years of contract negotiations in my engineering career had taught me to never sign anything under pressure. I decided to play a card Jason wouldn't expect, pretending to be more confused and forgetful than I actually was. I asked repeated questions, claimed I couldn't read the fine print without different glasses, and complained of fatigue. The lawyer looked impatient, but eventually they left without my signature on anything. After they departed, I called Walter, asking him to drive me to my bank. Despite still being weak from my heart attack, I needed to check something important. At the bank, I discovered my suspicions were correct. Jason had accessed my safe deposit box using the spare key I had given him for emergencies. The family heirlooms Linda had wanted Jason to have someday, her grandmother's diamond earrings, Her father's pocket watch, and several valuable coins my father had collected were all gone. The bank manager helped me revoke Jason's access to the box and change the signature card on my accounts. While there, I also discovered something even more disturbing: credit card statements showing recent charges I hadn't made, including expensive electronics and a weekend at a luxury resort. Jason had apparently helped himself to my credit cards while I was in the hospital, racking up thousands in charges. When I returned home, Sophia was waiting for her scheduled visit. She looked troubled and asked to speak with me privately. Once we were alone, she revealed something that made my blood run cold. While helping me to the bathroom, she had overheard Jason on the phone telling someone that I was showing signs of dementia and would need to be declared incompetent soon. He had laughed and said something about striking while the iron was hot. That evening, when Jason returned from work, I carefully maintained my act of being slightly confused and forgetful. I watched him exchange texts with someone, smirking slightly as he typed. I pretended not to notice, instead asking innocent questions about his childhood that I knew the answers to, occasionally mixing up details to reinforce his perception that my mind was slipping. The next day, I had my scheduled follow-up with my cardiologist, Dr. Patel. Jason insisted on coming along, which suited my purposes. During the examination, I made a point of answering all cognitive questions perfectly, discussing my medication regimen in detail, and asking thoughtful questions about my recovery. Dr. Patel commented on how well I was doing mentally, noting that many heart attack patients experience some fogginess from medications, but I seemed sharp as ever. Jason looked disconcerted by this assessment, quickly changing the subject to whether I should be living alone. Dr. Patel replied that with proper support and precautions, many patients my age recovered well in their own homes, maintaining that independence was actually beneficial for recovery in many cases. I could see Jason's jaw tighten as another potential ally failed to support his narrative. As the weeks passed, Jason's impatience grew. He began making thinly veiled threats, suggesting that if I didn't cooperate with his plans voluntarily, he might need to take legal action for my own protection. He brought up stories of elderly people who had fallen or forgotten to take medications, implying that could be my fate without proper supervision. The constant psychological pressure took its toll. I began experiencing anxiety that triggered chest pains, leading to a frightening visit to the emergency room. Though tests showed it wasn't another heart attack, just stress, the incident gave Jason more ammunition for his argument that I couldn't manage on my own. My depression deepened as I felt the walls closing in. I spent more time alone in my bedroom, looking at old photos and wondering how the sweet boy in those pictures had become the calculating man now trying to strip me of my autonomy. I lost weight, had trouble sleeping, and found little joy in things that used to please me. My workshop gathered dust as I lacked the energy or motivation to return to my projects. One afternoon, Walter visited with troubling news. Jason had approached him about buying my workshop tools at a steep discount, claiming I had authorized the sale. Walter, suspicious, had stalled by saying he needed time to figure out where he would put everything. His revelation confirmed that Jason was already dividing up my possessions, assuming his plan would succeed. That night, I experienced my lowest moment. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I felt utterly defeated. I considered simply giving in, signing whatever Jason wanted, and accepting that my independent life was over. For a brief, dark moment, I even wondered if Linda had been the fortunate one, spared from seeing what our son had become or experiencing this kind of betrayal. As tears ran down my face, my gaze fell again on Linda's journals on the nightstand. I pulled out a different volume this time, opening to an entry from when Jason was a teenager. He had been caught cheating on a test, and Linda had written about our discussion of how to handle it. Her words leapt off the page. We must love Jason enough to hold him accountable. Enabling poor choices isn't love, it's abandonment of our responsibility to help him become a man of character. Linda's wisdom from beyond the grave strengthened my resolve. I realized that allowing Jason to take advantage of me wasn't doing him any favors. Real love meant standing up to him, not just for my sake, but for his as well. His behavior would ultimately lead to his own unhappiness, and as his father, I still had a responsibility to guide him, even if that guidance came in the form of consequences for his actions. I pulled out a notebook and began writing, making a list of everything I knew Jason had done, and everyone who might be able to corroborate my experiences. By morning, I had the beginnings of a plan to reclaim my life and perhaps help my son find his way back to the values Linda and I had tried to instill in him. The morning after my revelation, I asked Sophia if she knew any elder law attorneys. Her eyes lit up as she mentioned Grace Johnson, who specialized in protecting seniors from financial exploitation, including by family members. Sophia offered to call her on my behalf, and by that afternoon, I had an appointment scheduled for the following day during Jason's regular work hours. Grace Johnson turned out to be a formidable woman in her early 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and piercing eyes that missed nothing. In her tastefully appointed office, I poured out my story, showing her the evidence I had gathered, including photos I had taken of the real estate brochures and emails in Jason's briefcase. Grace listened carefully, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions. When I finished, Grace explained my legal rights clearly and compassionately. As long as I was mentally competent, no one, not even my son, could force me to sell my home or move into a facility. She outlined several immediate steps to protect myself, including revoking any powers of attorney Jason might have, securing my financial accounts, and documenting all unusual behavior or conversations. Grace also suggested I consider setting up a revocable trust with a professional trustee rather than a family member to ensure my wishes would be carried out even if my health declined in the future. She warned me that Jason might escalate his efforts once he realized I was fighting back, and we needed to be prepared for that possibility. Before I left her office, Grace helped me draft formal letters to my bank, investment firm, and credit card companies, alerting them to the potential for financial exploitation and revoking any authorizations Jason might have. She also connected me with a geriatric care manager who could document my living conditions and mental capacity, creating an official record that I was able to live independently with appropriate support. My next step was securing allies at my bank. Walter introduced me to his daughter Megan, who worked as a branch manager at a different location of my bank. Though not my direct banker, she offered invaluable advice about placing alerts on my accounts and helped expedite the process of investigating the fraudulent credit card charges Jason had made. Through Megan's connections, I discovered something that helped explain Jason's desperate behavior. He had significant gambling debts and had made several failed investments in high-risk ventures that had depleted his savings. His expensive lifestyle had been maintained increasingly through debt, and he was facing a financial crisis of his own making. My house, fully paid off and in a desirable neighborhood that had appreciated significantly, represented a solution to his financial problems. Armed with this knowledge, I began the next phase of my plan, gathering evidence. I purchased a small digital recorder and kept it in my pocket whenever Jason visited. Oregon being a one-party consent state for recordings, this was legal as long as I was part of the conversation. I documented his statements about my mental capacity, his pressure tactics regarding selling the house, and his veiled threats. Grace helped me secure my remaining assets, including having a locksmith change the locks on my house while Jason was at work. We also worked with my doctors to get formal assessments of my cognitive function, all of which confirmed I was perfectly competent to manage my own affairs. These reports were filed with Grace's office as evidence against any potential guardianship petition Jason might file. With my immediate protections in place, Grace and I developed a more sophisticated strategy. Instead of directly confronting Jason, which might cause him to accelerate his plans, we decided to make him believe he was winning gradually. This would buy us time to complete all our legal preparations while keeping him from taking drastic action. I began visible spring cleaning efforts around the house, deliberately in Jason's presence. I sorted through belongings, created donation piles, and talked about simplifying my life. Jason observed these activities with poorly concealed satisfaction, interpreting them as signs I was coming around to the idea of selling the house. Taking the bait, Jason began bringing potential buyers through the house, real estate agents who assessed its value, and investors looking for properties in my desirable neighborhood. I was polite but non-committal during these visits, maintaining my appearance of gradual acceptance while documenting every person who came through. During this time, I reconnected with Amanda, the nurse from the hospital. Over coffee at a local cafe, I explained my situation, and she readily provided a written statement about Jason's behavior during my hospitalization, particularly his focus on my assets rather than my health. Her professional observations would carry weight if we needed to demonstrate a pattern of exploitative behavior. Dr. Patel also proved to be a valuable ally. During a follow-up appointment that Jason couldn't attend due to work commitments, I confided my concerns. The doctor was outraged on my behalf and provided a detailed letter affirming my mental competence and decision-making capacity, explicitly stating, there was no medical reason I could not continue living independently in my own home with appropriate support services. As my physical strength returned, so did my emotional resilience. The depression that had gripped me began to lift as I took action rather than remaining a passive victim. I started spending time in my workshop again, the familiar motions of sanding and carving wood bringing comfort and a sense of normalcy. I even began a new project, an intricate jewelry box, similar to one I had made for Linda years ago, channeling my emotions into creative work rather than despair. Throughout this period, I underwent a transformation from victim to advocate for myself. With each step I took to protect my rights, with each ally I gathered, I reclaimed a piece of my dignity and autonomy. The fear that had paralyzed me gave way to determination and even a certain righteous anger that fueled my resolve. Grace helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of elder abuse, a term I had never associated with myself. I had always thought of elder abuse as something that happened to frail, isolated seniors, not active, engaged people like me. This realization helped me frame Jason's actions not as a personal failing as a father, but as part of a broader societal problem that could affect anyone as they aged. By the time 2 months had passed since my heart attack, I had assembled a strong team of supporters, gathered substantial evidence, and completed all the legal protections Grace had recommended. I had also allowed Jason to believe his plan was working, that I was gradually accepting the inevitability of selling my home and moving to an assisted living facility. The stage was set for the final phase of my counter-strategy, the confrontation I had been preparing for since discovering my son's betrayal. 6 weeks into my recovery, I felt strong enough to implement the final phase of our plan. I called Jason and told him I had been thinking seriously about his suggestions and was ready to discuss selling the house. His voice immediately brightened, and he offered to come over that evening with some paperwork to get the process started. Before he arrived, I made several important calls, strategically timing the events that would unfold. Walter and Carol positioned themselves for an evening garden chat with their neighbors across the street, giving them a clear view of my house. Sophia arranged to drop by with some paperwork from my doctor. Grace would be on standby, ready to come over if needed. When Jason arrived, he was practically giddy, barely concealing his excitement as he spread papers across my dining table. He had already prepared a listing agreement with a real estate agent he knew, as well as documents giving him authority to negotiate the sale on my behalf. I listened patiently as he outlined his plans for a quick sale, nodding occasionally and asking clarifying questions that gave no indication of my true intentions. After he finished his presentation, I calmly stated that I agreed the house should be sold, but that I would be handling the process myself. I wanted to work with my own real estate agent and would retain control of the proceeds. I suggested that perhaps a small portion could help him with his gambling debts, which I mentioned casually, watching his expression change from triumph to shock. The color drained from Jason's face as he realized I knew far more than he had assumed. He quickly tried to recover, denying any gambling problem and claiming everything he had done was out of concern for my welfare. I allowed him to finish his explanation before reaching into my pocket and placing the digital recorder on the table between us. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on Jason's face when I played back his own voice discussing how to have me declared incompetent, how the house could solve his financial problems, and his laughter when joking with a friend about the old man being clueless. His expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally a calculating assessment of his remaining options. Jason's first response was to deny the authenticity of the recordings, claiming they must have been edited or manipulated. When I mentioned the witnesses who could corroborate everything, including medical professionals and bank officials, his strategy shifted to minimizing his actions, suggesting I had misunderstood his intentions, and that everything had been done out of love and concern. When this approach failed to move me, Jason's demeanor darkened. He began listing all he had done for me since my heart attack, the time he had taken off work, the meals he had prepared, the appointments he had driven me to. He portrayed himself as the devoted son dealing with a difficult, ungrateful father. The guilt trip might have worked months ago, but now I recognized it as another manipulation tactic. As Jason's arguments grew more desperate, I revealed the next piece of evidence, the trust documents Grace had helped me create. I explained that I had established a revocable living trust with my house and other assets, with a professional trustee to manage things if I became incapacitated in the future. The terms of the trust would provide for my care while protecting my assets from exploitation. Jason's face reddened as he realized the extent of my preparations. His voice rose as he demanded to know if he was even in my will anymore, or if I had cut him out completely. I calmly explained that I still loved him as my son and hoped for reconciliation, but that I needed to see genuine remorse and changed behavior before I could trust him with any inheritance. This proved to be the breaking point. Jason stood up so violently that his chair toppled backward, shouting that I would regret this decision. He threatened legal action, claiming he would have me declared incompetent, regardless of my preparations. His face was contorted with rage as he loomed over me, his control completely shattered. At that precise moment, the doorbell rang. Jason froze, suddenly aware of how his behavior would appear to an outside observer. Sophia entered with perfect timing, carrying a folder of medical documents and looking concerned at the obvious tension in the room. Behind her were Walter and Carol, who had seen the confrontation escalating through the window and decided to intervene. With witnesses present, Jason struggled to compose himself. He mumbled something about this not being over and stormed out of the house, brushing roughly past Sophia and Walter. As the door slammed behind him, I felt a curious mixture of sadness for the son I had lost and relief that the confrontation had finally happened. The following week brought the expected escalation. Jason attempted to rally family members to his side, calling my brother in Arizona and Linda's sister in Michigan, spinning a story about my mental decline and his efforts to help me. Fortunately, I had already reached out to them, explaining the situation and providing copies of my medical evaluations confirming my competence. Instead of finding allies, Jason discovered that the family was now watching him with suspicion and concern. Jason's next move was to consult with an attorney about challenging my competency legally. His lawyer, after reviewing the extensive documentation I had assembled, apparently advised against this course of action. Grace heard through professional channels that the attorney had warned Jason he would likely lose such a case and could potentially face counterclaims for financial elder abuse, given the evidence I had gathered. The final confrontation came 3 weeks after the initial showdown. Jason arrived unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, his appearance disheveled and his manner subdued. He asked if we could talk, and I cautiously agreed, making sure my recorder was in my pocket and texting Walter to be on alert. Jason surprised me by laying out the truth without prompting. He admitted to his gambling problems, his failed investments, and the mounting debts that had driven him to view my house as a solution to his financial troubles. He described how easy it had been to justify his actions by telling himself he was helping me, even as he knew his primary motivation was self-interest. I listened silently, searching his face for signs of genuine remorse versus another manipulation tactic. There were tears in his eyes, but I had seen him cry before when it served his purposes. I had also seen the cold calculation he was capable of over the past months. I remained guarded, unwilling to be fooled again by the son who had already betrayed me so deeply. When Jason finished his confession, he asked hesitantly if there was any way to rebuild our relationship. I told him honestly that while I would always love him as my son, trust once broken was not easily repaired. Any reconciliation would require concrete actions, not just words, beginning with him getting professional help for his gambling addiction and demonstrating real change over time. Jason nodded slowly, seeming to understand the magnitude of the damage he had caused. As he rose to leave, he paused at the door and said something that suggested perhaps a small part of the son I had raised still existed somewhere inside him. He said that his mother would have been disappointed in the man he had become, but proud of how I had stood up for myself. Then he was gone, leaving me to wonder if this was truly the beginning of redemption or just another act in a long con. As I closed the door behind him, I realized that the spring cleaning I had pretended to do as part of my strategy had become real in an unexpected way. I had cleared out the cobwebs of naive trust, sorted through the accumulated weight of unexamined assumptions about family loyalty, and discarded the notion that blood ties automatically conferred the right to exploit. The house was still mine, but more importantly, so was my life and my future. The confrontation with Jason marked a turning point in my recovery, both physical and emotional. With the constant stress of his manipulation removed, my health improved dramatically. My blood pressure stabilized, I slept better, and I had more energy for physical therapy exercises. Dr. Patel noted the improvement at my 3-month follow-up, commenting that sometimes removing toxic relationships could be as important for cardiac health as medication. In the aftermath of Jason's confession, I took steps to ensure my future security. Grace helped me finalize a comprehensive estate plan, including a revocable living trust, advanced healthcare directives, and a will that reflected my values and wishes. I named Walter as my healthcare proxy, trusting his judgment and integrity if I ever became unable to make my own medical decisions. The legal consequences for Jason's actions were relatively minor compared to what they could have been. After consulting with Grace, I decided not to pursue criminal charges for the credit card fraud or file an elder abuse report with Adult Protective Services. Instead, I required Jason to repay the fraudulent charges and return the family heirlooms he had taken from my safe deposit box. This gesture of restraint was not for Jason's benefit but for my own peace of mind, allowing me to move forward without the additional stress of protracted legal proceedings. With my house securely mine for as long as I wished to live in it, I began making practical modifications for aging in place. I installed grab bars in the bathroom, improved the lighting throughout the house, and added a railing on the steps to the back garden. These changes weren't concessions to old age, but practical adaptations that would allow me to maintain my independence safely. One of the most positive developments came from an unexpected direction. Sophia, whose contract as my home health aide had officially ended, mentioned that she and her husband were struggling to find affordable housing for themselves and their 2 young children. Their landlord was selling their apartment building, and rents in Portland had skyrocketed beyond what they could afford on their healthcare salaries. After some careful consideration, I proposed converting my rarely used basement into a legal apartment for Sophia's family. They would have their own entrance and privacy, while I would have the security of trusted people nearby if I needed assistance. I hired a contractor to add a small kitchen and bathroom, ensuring everything met code requirements for a separate dwelling unit. Sophia and her family moved in 2 months later, bringing new life and energy to my quiet house. Her children, 7-year-old Maya and 9-year-old Leo, quickly adopted me as an honorary grandfather. Their laughter filled the garden where they played after school, and I found myself teaching Leo basic woodworking skills in my workshop on weekends. The arrangement benefited everyone, providing Sophia's family with affordable housing and giving me companionship without sacrificing independence. My connection to the broader community also strengthened during this period. Through Grace, I learned about a support group for seniors who had experienced exploitation or abuse. Initially reluctant to attend, thinking my situation was unique, I was surprised to discover how common my experience was. Men and women from all walks of life shared similar stories of children, grandchildren, or caregivers who had attempted to take advantage of them during periods of vulnerability. In this group, I found not only support but purpose. My engineering background and newly acquired legal knowledge made me a valuable resource for others navigating similar situations. I began volunteering with a local senior advocacy organization, helping other elders understand their rights and recognize warning signs of exploitation. What had begun as a personal tragedy transformed into an opportunity to help others avoid similar pain. Walter and I expanded our friendship in new directions as well. Noticing the neighborhood children's interest in my woodworking projects, we decided to offer a basic woodworking class for kids at the community center. Teaching young people to create with their hands proved immensely satisfying, and watching their pride in completing simple projects reminded me of teaching Jason when he was young. As for Jason, the path to rebuilding our relationship proved long and uncertain. True to his word, he did seek help for his gambling addiction, joining Gamblers Anonymous and working with a therapist specializing in addiction. We established careful boundaries, meeting only in public places at first, with conversations focused on his recovery rather than my assets or living situation. The legal and social consequences of his actions had been significant. Several of his colleagues learned about his behavior through the family grapevine, damaging his professional reputation. His girlfriend broke up with him after discovering what he had attempted to do. These natural consequences, though painful for him, were important lessons that I could not have taught him through words alone. 6 months after our confrontation, Jason asked to meet at our favorite diner, a place we had frequented when he was in high school. Over coffee, he placed a small wooden box on the table between us, one I recognized immediately as a jewelry box I had made for his mother years ago. Inside were her earrings and the other family heirlooms he had taken. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed it toward me, saying he had no right to them given his actions. I studied my son's face, noting new lines of stress, but also a clarity in his eyes that had been absent before. I told him I would keep the items safe until he had demonstrated, through consistent actions over time, that he could be trusted with Linda's legacy. This wasn't punishment but protection, both of the family treasures and of Jason himself from further temptation. That conversation marked a tentative new beginning, not a complete reconciliation. Trust, once shattered, could only be rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions rather than promises or apologies. I set clear conditions for rebuilding our relationship, including continued treatment for his gambling addiction, financial transparency, and respect for my autonomy and decisions. As my 70th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the tumultuous journey of the past year. The heart attack that had nearly taken my life had instead led to a renewal I couldn't have imagined. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, formed new and deeper connections in my community, and perhaps most importantly, learned that blood relation alone did not entitle anyone to my trust, respect, or resources. Those had to be earned, regardless of family ties. I realized that the most valuable legacy I could leave Jason wasn't the house or financial assets, but the example of integrity and self-respect I had demonstrated by standing up for myself. By refusing to be victimized, even by my own child, I had taught a lesson more powerful than any lecture or punishment could convey. Whether Jason would fully absorb that lesson remained to be seen, but I had done what Linda would have wanted, holding him accountable while leaving the door open for genuine change. The spring cleaning that had begun as a ruse had become a metaphor for the purification of my life, removing toxic influences and making space for new growth and possibilities. My house remained my sanctuary, but now it was filled with new purpose and connections that enriched my days and gave meaning to my continued journey. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love to protect yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, advocating for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, regardless of your age or relationship to the person taking advantage of you. If this story helped you see a situation in your life more clearly, please like and subscribe to support more content like this. And if you know someone facing elder exploitation, share this video, because sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power and dignity.